I'm Zach Working. I'm one of the orthopedic trauma surgeons in Portland, Oregon at Oregon Health and Science University. I am fortunate enough to be our trauma director, which is a role that is really near and dear to me. I have a dual appointment here. I'm both in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery and Rehabilitation as well as the Biomedical Engineering Department, which is wonderful. That's sort of an opportunity created by some of my collaborations within that group. And I serve nationally in a number of capacities. I'm on the OTA Research Committee, which means I help review research grants for OTA funding. And I'm going to be transitioning into a role here next month where I'm going to be helping to administer the OTA Basic Science Forum for the next couple of years. So that's a really exciting time. All these are just really kind of fortunate things that have happened to me over the last couple of years. In terms of giving me the opportunity to keep, kind of pushing and connect with people over research. I think whenever you end up talking to people about this question, the answers are a little bit humbling. I think it's very easy to like meet people that write papers and assume that there was like some grand plan, and that was not it. I went to med school at the University of Pittsburgh, for which I am always grateful for that opportunity. I only got into two medical schools, was on a lot of wait lists, and was grateful for the chance to go to a program that had a great orthopedics department run by Freddie Fu at the time, and to sort of begin that foray into orthopedics. And it was very difficult to break into the research division at Pittsburgh, and so it kind of didn't happen early on. And med school was really hard, so I went home to Seattle. I'm from Seattle originally for the summer after my first year in med school. At the time, my mom was kind of sick and I wanted to be home. And everybody then is always like, "Oh, how's she doing?" She's doing great. Thank you for asking. I'm going to see her on Saturday. And so I cold called some people at the University of Washington trying to get, some research experience, some meaningful research experience. And I didn't realize that the second person I called was the chairman of the department. That was Rick Matson, who's famous for his contributions in shoulder replacement surgery and the introduction of the reverse shoulder arthroplasty to the United States. And Dr. Matson hired me after our first phone call to as a hired is a little bit of a silly thing, basically as like a volunteer employee for the summer. And so I followed Dr. Matson around with a thermal camera for the entire summer and videotaped all of his shoulder replacements because we were trying to figure out the temperature at the surface of the glenoid reaming in his shoulder replacements, and that ended up turning into a paper. And then all of a sudden, dominoes started falling. I was able to get in um, with the research division at Pittsburgh because of a recommendation from Dr. Matson. And got involved with Dr. Fu with his ACL research team, and worked in that capacity for a couple of years during med school and during a year specifically on that, and then was able to sort of turn that experience into many meaningful experiences in residency doing research, and really like things have just built organically from there over the course of 15 years. I just did a talk for the first time that New Mexico invited me to come give a research talk in how to build a career in research. And in preparing for that talk, I sort of looked back at what I'd been involved in, and I realized that probably the most important thing early on in my research career was starting to hone down the number of things I was working on. So I really only work on four things right now. Um, they're all kind of like platforms, so there's many sub things under those things, but I kind of don't say yes to anything outside of those main focuses, and they are number one, I am involved with um, Dr. Chelsea Bainey at UCSF, working on trying to understand how we can use a potential biomarker called CXM, which is an ELISA-based assay that looks at the breakdown products of collagen type 10 in serum. So we think that allows us to measure sort of the evolution and breakdown of the one of the intermediate steps in endochondral ossification. We don't really have a lot of meaningful measures of bone healing that are quantitative in manner. Pretty much everything's qualitative in measures. And so That's taken up a ton of time. That's great because we just got our first major clinical paper published last week. It's going to be in PLOS medicine shortly, which we are grateful for. That's like a paper we've been working on for 9 years. So I do a lot of stuff based on bone healing in that capacity. So bone healing is one thing. The second thing is anemia in trauma. Um, which is sort of near and dear to my heart. I realized when my wife and I were fortunate enough to have our first child, my wife had a C-section. And then on the first day in the hospital, we had someone come approach us and say, we think it's really important for your well-being and your, fatigue and depression, after having this child to receive an iron transfusion. And I sort of perked up and I said, well, wait a minute. I've never heard of that. What do you mean? And so they explained, some of the science. They brought us a couple of papers. And I kind of sat there dumbfounded because all I could think about was all of my patients in orthopedic trauma that had lost a lot of blood that we weren't even thinking about this at all. So that really, my daughter turned 6 this summer. So we've been working on that for a number of years, trying to figure out what the incidence of anemia and iron deficiency is in an orthopedic trauma population. We ran a pilot trial a couple years ago, looking at the potential benefits from doing iron infusion, a double-blinded randomized pilot, giving iron infusions to patients after trauma. And so I'm heavily involved in trying to get that effort funded. Um, the other two platforms are also kind of small pet projects. One of them is they're really translational. I still really want to understand more about the muscle around open fractures and orthopedic trauma. And so I partner with two outstanding PhD researchers here at the OHSU BME department, and then at the University of Oregon also. So that's Karina Nakayama and then Nick Willett. And so we are engaged in a number of different capacities looking at regenerative solutions and therapies for trying to recapitulate muscle damage after open fractures and orthopedic trauma. And then sort of the final capacity is I'd like to find a different way to measure what's going on in that muscle. And so, to that regard, I'll just say very shortly, we're trying to figure out the best way, and then what it means to measure pH in and around traumatized muscle. Yeah, I think one of the main challenges for a surgeon who is trying to be a surgeon scientist is that you end up kind of wearing multiple hats, and you sort of don't get credit in either domain for things you do in the other domain, which is kind of interesting. There's not a lot of people who would consider themselves, an aspiring surgeon scientist, and I think this is one of the reasons why. When you're wearing your surgeon hat, all the time you spend on science is in the way of surgical productivity, and so you sort of go like, oh, okay, how bad do I want to be a scientist? Am I willing to, take a pay cut? Am I willing to not have as much, prestige, not be involved in as many things? Maybe that means I have to give up certain kinds of surgery. Like maybe I can't be a pelvic. I'm fortunate in my center that this isn't the case, but maybe I can't be a pelvis and acetabular surgeon because that's sort of a thing you need to be doing all the time to do it really well. And if some of the time you're not a surgeon, then it's kind of like, well, okay, what are the trade-offs I'm willing to make? I think those are sort of challenges. There's, I think in the research world, then it's also, if you're not spending time creatively and constructively and thinking about your projects in a disciplined manner, then it's sort of like, well, are your ideas a little bit haphazard? Are they as thoughtful or articulated as well enough, or have you planned far out enough? It's kind of hard to do platform-based research without planning on a 2 to 5 year domain rather than like what's happening tomorrow. It doesn't really work like that. So that takes time. And so where does that time come from? So I think that's the major challenge is sort of being able to have enough discipline to say what's important to me, what am I willing to give up, and then not second guess yourself all the time in that capacity. I think when you're sort of having, a day where, as a surgeon, my favorite days are in the operating room. That doesn't mean I don't like my research days. I really like my research days, and it's really good for me to have those different interesting points. But it can be very hard to ignore the siren song of like, oh, but I could be operating today, But these projects are important to me, and I think remembering that is really important to have that sort of grounded that rooting in what you're doing and why you're choosing things. It's like being intentional about it. Oh, I mean, I think the biggest thing is uh well, I'll answer that in two ways. Number one is I think that I resisted for so long toning down the number of things I was involved in. And that was because I was, in many ways insecure about what I was producing. And I felt like I needed to have as many, you know, pots on the stove going so that I could produce as much as possible. I felt like that was, going to be an indicator of my ability as a researcher, as well as a way to cultivate my reputation in a way. And I think, frankly, that if I had spent all that time running around on random stuff, focusing on my core things, I would have arrived in the same place. But I didn't know that then. I think I probably would have been more thoughtful about some bigger projects that were more important to me than the smaller ones I chewed up time on. Hindsight's 2020. So I would have made that change earlier if I could have gotten that advice, at maybe a different time, or maybe listened to that advice at a different time is probably what I should say. And I think the other thing that I would do different is I would sooner in my career come to the realization that where I am on a paper really doesn't hold any weight over my satisfaction of the research or my prestige or my self-worth or really anything meaningful in life. And I think that rat race is ridiculous. I think being involved in important things and making contributions, the contribution you made, and other people do too. And the more you do, the more you'll be involved in, whether it's at a junior resident level or still as a trainee level or as an attending surgeon or independent researcher. I mean, there's no hiding real value. And I just feel like the rat race for credit is destructive. So I feel like I've really kind of been fortunate enough to be able to let go of that a little bit. And my enjoyment of research has skyrocketed since that time. I think there's two things that I would love to talk about, and I think the first one is um, that it is really important to find research that is interesting to you. I think that certainly when you begin, maybe that choice is not an important luxury to have. Certainly, I have worked on many projects that have not been my first love, and I'm grateful for those opportunities. I'm grateful for many countless opportunities that have landed under that umbrella. And at the same time, if I had to do those things forever, I think I would stop doing research. And so one of the things that keeps me going is that I've been able to find topics that are incredibly personally interesting and captivating, because I think it's sort of this calculus of frequently researches this extremely delayed arc of slow rejection over a very long time, culminating in like one moment of success at the end of it. And so there's so much delayed and muted gratification for it that that equation doesn't work for me if it's something that's just like not super interesting. So finding those things that are interesting to you help really kind of maintain the train of research. And that's I feel like I got there by trial and error. And I'm sure there's more thoughtful ways to get there, but I am so grateful now to have things to work on that are super interesting and that I sort of have organic thoughts on by without prompting. It's really great to feel creativity come from you rather than be something that you have to force out of you. And I think it is really difficult to be creative about things that you aren't interested in. And I think the other piece of advice is um, to for people who are trying to develop research careers is to not try to go it alone. I feel like my career success increased substantially when I realized that like I couldn't go it alone and that I stopped trying to write research grants that were just me. as the person, and started to bring in research teams into my grant applications. And that was humbling. I think that's really kind of one of the challenges of, being a surgeon, being a researcher is, where should your ego be? Is this something that you're declaring that you're the person that should be able to do these things? It's very weird writing, a personal statement that frames yourself so positively. That doesn't come naturally to me, certainly. So I think that's all good, and it's good to have confidence in yourself, but there's nothing better than having a good research team of people that you've got relationships that you've tied together, that you've built with over the years. And I'm so grateful for mine. I think back to Chelsea Bainey. I mean, we've been working together now. This is my um, oh man, this is my eighth year in practice, and we've been working on College in 10 for almost a decade now. And I think we spend as much time in our research meetings talking about our kids as we do about research. So I'm grateful to have cultivated, a professional relationship and a friendship like that. And then I would say the same thing about my University of Oregon and OHSU colleagues. The fact that I have these rewarding people to come back to on a regular basis, to talk about things that are interesting and hear what's interesting to them is like really, it was really fantastic. And if I sat in my own silo, I would never have that ever. Yeah, the thing that's on the top of my radar, really is continuing to push on, sort of those first two platforms of work. I'm really interested in continuing on with our work on anemia and orthopedic trauma, and then sort of on our biomarker understanding. So I'll talk about each of those. With regards to anemia, to me, this is just like one of those things that we're going to look back on and say, "Wow, I can't believe we weren't paying attention to that." Our scoping review of our patient population here at OHSU was startling. We found that it was nearly 90% of patients that came through our orthopedic trauma system, over the course of a year had, some derangement and sort of what you would consider their standard iron labs, after orthopedic trauma. And I think it is ridiculous to think that that is 100% of our people are coming in with some kind of pre-existing iron thing that just doesn't match what we know about population norms. So these people are kind of, as a function of, the blood that they lose in their trauma, they're really behind the eight ball in their recovery. And this is really meshing at a time where it's a real priority for the Orthopedic Trauma Association to find ways to mitigate some of the mental health consequences that come from experiencing trauma, from experiencing musculoskeletal trauma. And so I think it's one of those things where you want to correct the easy things that you can, and this is an easy thing staring at our face. We have safe therapies that we can give that are in good supply, in North America, and we could dramatically affect people if we can build the sufficient evidence behind it to arrive at the conclusion. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. I thought maybe we were going to take off last year. We got some good scores on a DoD grant, but ultimately all research stories end in rejection early on. And so, we're sort of in our first cycle of rejection and taking a pause this year as the research landscape, as everybody knows, is like super volatile at the moment. So I'm kind of waiting to see where some of those things settle out and getting many of our intermediate papers published so we can cite them in future applications and things like that. So I'm really, really looking forward to sort of our next phase in that work. And then with regards to the biomarker, I think the quantification of what we do in orthopedic surgery is just like such a fun umbrella. And to me, being able to have a biomarker that we can use not only for clinical research, but also for measuring different perturbations or interventions in sort of like a basic science translational situation in animal models, I think will be really productive for quite a bit of work. In particular, I'm fascinated by the opportunity to, I'm sort of pointing across the hallway here. One of my junior partners, Dane Brodkey, is working on a really amazing way to measure step counts in patients using their smartphones, through like a super simple application that, with the patient's consent, takes a look at their pre-injury step counts also as an ability to establish a baseline, which is so good because in orthopedic trauma, that's like, it's so meaningless to have patient reported outcomes. There's really nothing to compare it to. It's not like patient-reported outcomes in arthroplasty or foot and ankle surgery or these other domains of orthopedics. So I think being able to take some of our more biological foundational work and sort of mesh it with his, passive recording outcomes is really an amazing opportunity for us. And I'm excited for kind of what the next 5 years hold in that regard. I think it's going to be really great to work together. Well, I'm particularly fond of the ISFR. I think that there's not that many people around the world who are focused on the science of fracture healing, and to have a community where you can connect with people and discuss that common interest is amazing. We had a really great joint meeting last year between the OTA and the ISFR, and I think that was probably my uh, funnest time at the OTA meeting here in the last 5 years or so. I in particular, really enjoyed listening to Dr. Duda from Germany come and speak about some of his work, and he's got a tremendous team in Germany looking at other molecular markers of fracture healing and trying to build, in many ways, similar things to what we're doing, predictive models. And I just think it's really incredible to see other people trying to dig at the same problem from different directions. So I think that it's so wonderful to not be stuck in your silo and talk to other people that are thinking about the same problems, because you'll start talking about something and they'll say, "We've thought about that." And then they'll say some things and you go, "Oh, now I need to go think about that for like 2 months." But those are really productive jumps in your understanding. And so being able to have a place where those people can come together is great. I think, for me, in the, again, I think you can sort of see the theme here is that I'm really trying to move past the place where I'm keying on my individual success. I think the greatest thing in my career isn't really a singular moment. It's sort of a thing that we've been doing here at Oregon. My senior partner, Darren Freese, has been here a long time, and frequently working here kind of individually on his own. It's been sort of a challenging thing to maintain a group of partners here. And he and I have been able to stabilize the trauma division here, and we've been able to grow now to a group of four. And so we have two junior partners that are incredibly great people to spend every day with. That's Graham DeKaiser and Dane Brodkey. And so we've grown to this group of four people that are all very interested in fracture science and clinical trials. When I got here, we weren't involved in any trials. We're now involved in seven multi-centered national and international trials. And so my greatest moment is coming to the realization, really, that we've sort of made it as a group. Like, we have a self-sustaining thing, and we're involved in a ton of stuff, and we're putting out, X numbers of papers a year. And it's kind of just coming organically from conversations we're having with each other. So I think, to me, that's like the most rewarding thing that's happened in my career.